You are watching Conscious Evolution with Wes Heffernan.
Let's see, who was it? Lonnie and he had two people with him, I think. Oh, Sean and Isaiah had came back to the house a different way, and they came through this little section where there were people sitting on the curb, like just like this, looked like they were asleep. There was one person that still had the needle in their arm and like turned upside down with their legs sticking out, and I was like, Jesus, and that was like a block away, like a block and a half away was this area in Philly. And at this point, y'all may know where I'm talking about because it's a very specific and well-known area of Philadelphia that I'm trying to think of the name of. Kensington. Kensington is where we were a block and a half away from. And anyway, we were staying a block and a half away from this. And so I began with my internal dialogue guiding, what is this experience about? Like, what is there to gain with this experience, with where you're at? And that boundary between absolute hell, right, and hope is so thin, right, that it's so fragile. And so you're looking at where we're staying, a block and a half away, Kensington. Kensington is where we were a block and a half away from. And you have that zombie drug that's just rampant, right? The nasty sores, just horrible. Like, how would anybody go shoot that stuff up for the first time, seeing what it's doing, right? I mean, so what the dialogue was like showing me was like, right, like you have hell, there's no hope. That's what hell is. That's all it represents, is no hope. And then one step out from that is still like hell. You're on the surface of it, right? But you have hope. You can see a light. There is a spark, and right, so that one little step is what really separates being stuck with at least having the capacity to grow and move. Right? You're not going to grow and move in hell, right? It's just a loop until you either die or, right, you're not, or you make a choice to actually do the work necessary to move out of that. But that fragile line, boundary between hell and hope is where we were staying, so to speak, so to speak. And I learned a lot from that. And the idea is, because again, you go a block and a half the other direction and you hit another line where the houses are similar in nature, but they're nice. They're well kept, right? There's a tiny bit of grass in the front yard, right? Like, so you can see these boundaries that you move, you know, that these individuals, so to speak, could move through. Getting to a place of, you know, as you get further away and you get into the, you know, nice areas where, at least outwardly, it appears that these people feel safe and have a home and have purpose and have, you know, a place. And so you can see it like it was visible in my environment, these three kind of levels, if you will. And like going back to the chemistry thing with hydrogen and helium, in perspective, bringing all these three together, when we look at, in our science books, and we're looking at the structure of an atom, right? You have the nucleus, and then you have this first circle around it, which is where hydrogen and helium operate, and the electrons on that first orbital plane, and then on our book, it looks like it grows, and then you have the second orbital plane where I think you can have 6 electrons on, which takes you through the next 6 elements, right? And it keeps growing, right? As you add this next spherical skin to it, it grows. Well, that's not the case, right? The atom is the size of an atom, and even if it puts more electrons on that outer skin, it compresses the other skin in. And then, right, so it needs another orbital to grow into something or evolve into something greater. Well, it pushes all the other ones in. And all those electrons are still there. So to make it less simple or less difficult, just look at the first two, hydrogen, helium. On that second orbit, you have, you know, like carbon would be, I believe, about the last one. But those electrons that represent hydrogen, helium are still in there. They didn't go anywhere, right? They're compressed in. And so they're not expressing themselves as hydrogen or helium. They're expressing themselves as a part of carbon.
And doing their job.
And doing their job to be carbon, right? And so, the idea of compression and expansion leads right into the idea of breathing, right? Because like when you breathe, your lungs expand, and when you breathe out, your lungs contract. Well, when I breathe out and my lungs contract, if I were in a balloon, I would cause the balloon around me to expand, right? So expansion and contraction aren't a separate thing. They are, they're their own process, but if I contract my lungs, I'm expanding the environment around me. And if I
Gotta go somewhere.
Right, and then if I inhale, I'm pulling something in, and you're right,
Taking from it.
and while my lungs are expanding, the environment around me is contracting. And so it's something that happens simultaneously, right? Even though they're individual aspects, they happen simultaneously, and they're opposite of each other. And so this concept of breathing, the concept of compressing and expanding, on a universal level, right, there's this balance, whereas the entire universe is breathing, right, and it's expressing itself, right, but there's something that's sucking in too, right, something that's inhaling. If the stars and all these parts are exhaling, then there's some component to the universe that in equal terms is inhaling. And that's, where we come into the idea of black holes. But our current understanding, we think of black holes as these big giant structures that are in the center of, galaxies or whatever. Well, we're beginning to see and understand that, like, everything is a black hole. Like, even an atom is a black hole, like, expressing itself in this tiny little fashion. It's a vacuum, right, on one end, and it's something that's expressing on the other. And so the entire universe is constantly in a breath of inhale and exhale. And to tie in our Eastern concepts, that we've westernized them, right? But like all of your Eastern concepts of meditation talk about how important breathing is, and you have to focus on the breath. And that's true, right? This is our connection point, is our own breath. Mm-hmm. But like the breath that they're speaking of isn't focus on your breath. The breath that they're speaking of is focus on the breath, right? Mimic that with your breath, right? Become the process. That's what all of this boils down to, is the idea on the surface is to become God, but that's so misunderstood of what that represents, right? Like become this almighty being that, no, that's not what it is. Become the process. Become a part of the process.
The Bible says we're gods on this earth, but with a small g.
Yes, right.
Because
right.
it can never be God, obviously, large G.
Right.
So become the process.
And so again, that's what the journey is about. That's what the journey into the abyss, the story is about. That's what, the hero's journey is about. That's what alchemy is about. That's what metaphysics is about. That's what so much right under the surface, if we can pull back the curtain, right, and expose the functionality of our existence, all these things become apparent. But you have to be able to see below the surface. And I think for me, while trying to help open that curtain and pull that back, more of my place and purpose is to help guide those that are able to see beyond the curtain in what are they seeing, right? Like, how is these mechanisms working together? How do they fit together? And it's not about me telling you how so much as it is just giving hints of my perspective of what I see to help enlighten or to drive someone else to do their own work, to see it from their place, right? So if you have purpose and you find your place and you look back at the core, you're going to see the same thing I see. You're going to have your own depiction of it, because you're looking at it from a different perspective, right? Much like a house. If we took 10 people and we put one out back in the backyard and one in the front yard, one on each side, one on the roof, a couple inside in different rooms, and we were all like, okay, you describe your reality, your environment, what is this thing, this house? When we all 10 get back together, we're gonna have different stories, right? Because we're looking, even though we're looking at the same thing, we're all looking at a different component of it.
Right.
And this also plays into the capital G God versus the little g God. The capital G God can see it all, right? It is all. And that's where we're not. We're only gonna hold a particular perspective of that capital G all.
Thanks for watching. Join us next time on Conscious Evolution. Don't forget to subscribe.